Forsaken was Bungie's magnum opus. It delivered on all fronts: content, system changes, loot, sandbox, exotics, and the story. And the expansion would keep us busy and occupied as a community for quite a while. In October 2018, we get our first live event following the expansion, Festival of the Lost. Now, Festival of the Lost didn't come in year 1 of Destiny 2, so this would be its first debut in Destiny 2. So what'd we get? The activity that came along with this event was the Haunted Forest, finally something useful for the Infinite Forest concept in Curse of Osiris. The Haunted Forest feels like the type of content that the Infinite Forest was designed for. This activity had you clearing out waves of enemies before defeating a boss, and the forest would reset, getting harder and harder with each boss killed by giving you negative modifiers. The reward for playing this activity was of course festival masks like we'd seen in Destiny 1, but these masks gave you perks that would help you in the Haunted Forest. Also, you could earn the Horror Story auto rifle, which had Rampage and Zen Moment, so a pretty decent auto rifle. The festival also brought a host of new triumphs to work towards for the event, and of course quite a few new cosmetics for the cash shop. And thankfully this time it wasn't hard to acquire most items with just bright dust, and double engrams would be earned during the event. This first Festival of the Lost in Destiny 2 would be received pretty well as one of the better live events we've seen, on par if not better than the Festival of the Lost in Destiny 1. Thunderlord would also make a return during the festival in a quest that had us returning to the Cosmodrome from Destiny 1. It was part of a long, time-gated questline that revolved around finding who killed Master Ives, the Cryptarch from the Reef, in Destiny 1. Players definitely didn't like the time-gated questline, as most players just dislike time-gating as a whole, and I think if it were wrapped up during the Festival of the Lost instead of dragging on for the next few weeks, it would have likely been received a bit better. Still, it was nice to have Thunderlord back in the game, and it signaled that hey, machine guns are back in Destiny. But in December we'd be getting our first piece of content from the annual pass, Black Armory. This was Bungie's first attempt at the drip feed style content that would become the norm for the next 4 years of the franchise following the fall expansion. And initially players really didn't like it. In fact, Black Armory on day 1 didn't allow you to even hop in and play the new content because we were so under-leveled. It took a few days of grinding powerful drops in old content before we could try out the Volunder Forge. We would only have access to the Volunder Forge for the first few days of Black Armory, and despite having a roadmap that showed off we'd be getting the rest of them in the future, players just felt a little bit underwhelmed initially. A few days after release, we'd get access to the Gofanon Forge, and almost 2 weeks later we'd get access to the third forge, the Izanami Forge. Now the forges were fun pieces of content to grind, but only for a little while. The new loot from the forges is really what made players want to keep running them. The legendary weapons were some of the best we've ever seen. Hammerhead, Blast Furnace, Tartara Gaze, and 4 more could be obtained through the forges, and were all really good weapons. Hammerhead was the first machine gun we'd seen in Destiny 2 except for Thunderlord, and it was so nice to have this weapon type back in the game. The exotic weapons were random drops tied to each forge, and they were good. Laymanarch, Jotun, both staple exotics that still see a lot of use in the game today. A few more weeks would go by and we'd get the Niobe Labs secret quest. Initially players speculated that Niobe Labs would be a dungeon or something, and Bungie was pretty tight-lipped about what Niobe Labs was prior to its release. But what we got instead was something even crazier. One of the most challenging puzzles ever created that would unite the Destiny community for 81 hours in trying to solve it. It involved surviving waves of ads while trying to decipher symbols that could only be seen with specific weapons. Unfortunately, this puzzle took longer than intended by Bungie because of a glitch that prevented players from finding a missing piece of the puzzle once they reached level 7. After Bungie noticed this bug, they would provide players with a clue on their Twitter page. 81 hours later, and Niobe Labs was solved and in turn would unlock the final forge, the Bergusia Forge, where we would fight and defeat Spider's brother, Civix. However, because the puzzle was taking so long to unlock, Bungie would end up decoupling access to the Bergusia Forge from the puzzle and gave players access to it prior to its completion. Various other post-secrets would open up after Niobe Labs was completed, like the very grindy mysterious box quest that would wrap up 801's storyline and grant you with a new emblem and the Izanagi's Burden exotic sniper rifle. And finally, let's talk about the raid, Scourge of the Past. This was released alongside the Gofanon Forge, and it was much larger than the raid layers, but much smaller than Last Wish. Scourge of the Past was set within the last city, which was so cool. And the story was pretty interesting too. Traversing through the last city, defeating fallen combatants led by civics who were trying to break into an old black armory vault within the quarantine section of the city. We had to go in and stop that from happening as requested by Ada1. And Scourge of the Past as a whole was a very fun raid. It was fast paced and action focused. Bungie said they took inspiration from the Wrath of the Machine raid in Destiny 1 when creating Scourge, and I think it shows. The opening, the Sparrow race, destroying Insurrection Prime with a tank, and riding your Sparrow around the whole arena, it was definitely one of the more unique boss fights we've ever had. The loot from Scourge of the Past was also really good. The shotgun threat level in particular was sought after because it could roll with trench barrel, and it was basically a kinetic version of the Ikelos shotgun from Warmind. Anarchy, the raid exotic, would prove to be one of the best exotics in the game, as well as being used in almost every raid or nightfall going forward. As for the core activities, Iron Banner got a new armor set, and we received 3 new Pinnacle Weapons to grind for. In Forsaken, we had 3 PvP Pinnacle Weapons with Luna's Howl, Not Forgotten, and Redrix's Broadsword. But in Black Armory, each core activity would get their own Pinnacle Weapon. The Loaded Question Fusion Rifle for the Vanguard, Breakneck for Gambit, and Mountaintop for Crucible. All 3 of these weapons were just incredible. If you were around before sunsetting in Beyond Light, then you know just how powerful these guns were. Breakneck paired with the Loaded Question was a staple for my loadout for quite a while. And of course, Mountaintop absolutely ran PvP and PvE content and would continue that way for many months ahead. These weapons were basically exotics, as their perks were completely unique to these weapons and were insanely powerful. These Pinnacle Weapons were likely part of the reason Sunsetting was introduced, because their power exceeded every other legendary in the game. After the bulk of the Black Armory content, we'd also get a quest for the Last Word hand cannon, the Draw, which was a very tedious questline requiring a lot of drawn out grinding, but the final mission was pretty cool lore-wise and required you to have duels against the Hive. The Dawning made a return again this year and would be much improved over the 2017 version of the event. It brought us Eva Levante's baking oven, which you could use to bake treats and deliver to various NPCs who would grant you with rewards, like the new Avalanche machine gun and the Glimmer Slay Sparrow. And this was just fun, man. Snowballs made a return to the activities, and Eververse got some new cosmetics, and for the first time ever, we'd get multiplayer emotes. In February, we'd see Crimson Days return, which remained almost the same as last year, but this time you could earn a new bow, which came with Rapid Hit, a perk that isn't found on any other bow. Black Armory and the live event content by the end of the season would be some of the best content we'd ever gotten in the context of a seasonal content drop. Despite getting off to a slow start and the annoyance of the new drip feed style release, Black Armory was a great time to be playing Destiny. Now, something else would happen during this season, something that would change the future of Destiny forever.
Something big has happened. Bungie has split from Activision.
Activision had recently stated that Forsaken didn't meet sales expectations shortly after it had released, so I'm sure this might have had something to do with the split, and I'm also sure Bungie themselves wanted to part ways with Activision and retain the rights to the Destiny franchise, which they did. Now, would this be good for the future? Would this be bad for the future? Only time would tell. Another month would go by before we get the next piece of annual pass content, Season of the Drifter, releasing in March. A season focused all around the Drifter and a bit more about his backstory and character, meaning that this season was all about Gambit. At release, we'd get Gambit Prime, a more challenging version of the Gambit game mode that would have only 1 round instead of 3 rounds in a regular Gambit match, along with 2 new Gambit maps. New mechanics were added to every aspect of the mode. Draining motes from the enemy team by sending multiple blockers over, envoys would now be required to defeat in order to get rid of an immunity shield on the boss, and a damage well you'd have to step in order to get a buff that would grant you the ability to damage the primeval. There would be more of an emphasis on the roles of players that were introduced with some new armor sets. The Collector, Reaper, Sentry, and Invader armor sets that provided unique bonuses that would make players in those roles much stronger. Among other things, Collectors had the ability to collect 20 motes and send over a giant blocker. Reapers could debuff and mark high value targets for your allies. Sentries did bonus damage to Taken, and standing near the bank would heal them. And finally, the Invader, which regenerated primary and special ammo when invading, and locked the bank when you invaded, as well as drain motes if you stood near the bank. These were incredibly powerful armor sets that really changed the lethality of each player. And if you were like me who had a set Gambit team that knew their roles, you could be unstoppable with your efficiency. And how could you earn this gear? In the next new piece of content, the Reckoning. This was a PvE horde mode style activity that you could bring your entire Gambit team with, so just 4 players. And it was pretty challenging, but only on tier 2 and 3, which were released a bit later in the season. And because of the time-gated drip feed content, it also time-gated all of your progression as well, as you couldn't get a full gear set for Gambit Prime until all the tiers were out. This of course, again, wouldn't be received too well because players hate time-gated content, and even more so, time-gated progression. Especially at the time. This drip feed style was new to the game with the annual pass, and players were not quite taking a liking to it. It was just frustrating more than anything. There were a lot of new weapons between Gambit Prime and the Reckoning which weren't too bad, and farming tier 3 Reckoning was tough, especially thanks to the design of the area which allowed you to be knocked off the edge super easy. But Reckoning wasn't a bad game mode, just maybe a little bit tiresome since the gameplay loop of the season was play some Gambit Prime matches, then go do a Reckoning. Play Gambit Prime, then do a Reckoning. If Reckoning wasn't required to level up your new Gambit gear and instead was a separate activity you could grind for different reasons, it probably wouldn't have been disliked as much because yes, it didn't take long for players to share their frustrations with the activity. And Gambit Prime as a whole was also not loved, but it really depended on the type of player that you were. Me, I liked it, but probably not as much as the original Gambit because 1, I disliked health-gated boss fights and the need for a damage well to damage the boss, and 2, it was just so much sweatier. It was like a match of Trials of Osiris every time you played. A bit later in the season, we'd get Invitations of the 9, which was how the seasonal story would be told. Each week, Xur would bring an Invitation of the 9 for purchase and would send you around the solar system to grind out various checklists. The story bits were pretty cool and interesting, but from a gameplay perspective, they were basically just go kill some enemies type of quests, so they were pretty much like a big weekly bounty. We'd get the Thorn Exotic quest, and very similar to Black Armory's Last Word quest line, it was another tedious grind fest, until at the end, which would have you running a much more difficult version of the Savathûn Song Strike. Enemies would have triple burn applied for their damage types, and it was 10 power levels higher than the max power at the time. You would need to defeat 3 named Knight enemies, a bit of a callback to the Destiny 1 Exotic Sword quest lines that had something very similar. Season of the Drifter would bring some new exotics to the game as well. 1 armor piece for each class, Liar's Handshake for Hunters, Stronghold Gauntlets for the Titan, and Getaway Artist for the Warlocks. We'd also get some new Pinnacle Weapons, the Oxygen SR3 for the Vanguard, 21% Delirium for Gambit, and the Recluse for Crucible. Now the Vanguard and Gambit weapons weren't bad at all, but Recluse stole the show for this season, an SMG that became yet another staple for all loadouts in PvE content. It came with an insanely buffed version of Rampage that increased damage with any weapon kills. And yeah, this was a crazy weapon. And like last season, Iron Banner would also see a new armor set. Season of the Drifter was not universally loved by the community, in fact a lot of people disliked it a lot. I didn't necessarily love it, I much preferred Black Armory and its content offering, plus Black Armory brought a brand new raid, and if you weren't a fan of Gambit then you probably didn't like Season of the Drifter at all. And I wouldn't blame you because power ammo was such an annoyance in the game mode. But Season of the Drifter did do some things right, and it did address some of our issues with Black Armory. At release, it gave players power surge bounties that allowed us to increase our level enough to access the seasonal content day 1, which was an improvement over Black Armory. Also, private matches were added for Gambit. Before we'd get the next annual pass content drop, we'd see 2 more events in the game. One of them was Arc Week, a week focused around using arc damage for everything. Bounties would be arc focused, modifiers increased arc damage, and the Thunderlord exotic quest made a return for this week. All for the purpose of trying out our arc subclasses after they recently received a buff, as well as adding some new arc specific emotes. It was a bit of a weird little event, but yeah. Moving on. In mid-April, we'd get the spring event, the Revelry. This event had us heading back into the Infinite Forest to complete basically the same activity as the Haunted Forest, but of course with this new flowery springtime theme. It brought along a quest for a new exotic weapon, the Arbalist, that would require completing challenges in the Verdant Forest. The new armor from the event, paired with an item called Reveler's Tonic, gave us increased recharge rate buffs to abilities, and man was it crazy. Grenade spam went hard across all activities, PvP was effectively unplayable for the event, but the Revelry was a fun event, and its only failure was not allowing players to keep the armor glows permanently, as this kind of defeated the whole purpose of grinding for them. And this would be the only time the event took place in Destiny 2, probably because it was unbelievably unbalanced for the game. In May, we'd get a pretty nice surprise. The 0 Hour mission, which was very much akin to the Whisper of the Worm mission we got back in Warmind. The quest began with Mithrax, who we meet in the basement of the farm, and he sends us on a quest to stop the fallen House of Devils loyalists from stealing Siva tech from the Cryptarch vault inside our old Destiny 1 tower. This mission, like the Whisper mission, was great. Another timed, dungeon-like experience filled with some fun jumping puzzles, shortcuts, and memorable moments. Nobody can forget Trevor and the horror that filled inside you when he rounded the corner.
That's rough.
Fuck. Please don't turn down this way. Please don't turn down this way. Don't turn. I'm good.
Outbreak Perfected would become one of the best exotic weapons in the game, and for the upcoming Season of Opulence, we'll see why. And Season of Opulence would be the final content drop for the annual pass and would arrive in June. First up, we'd get the Menagerie, a 6-player match-made activity that would have a few unique mechanics for each encounter, but much less toned down from raid mechanics to accompany the match-made nature of the activity. This was Bungie's first ever 6-player match-made activity, and would become a wild success, mainly because of the loot it brought, and how you could obtain that loot. The Menagerie brought an item called the Chalice of Opulence, which allowed you to unlock runes and put them in the chalice. Once you completed a Menagerie run, you'd get whichever item you were speccing out for in your chalice, meaning you could farm god rolls for things like Austringer or Beloved endlessly until you got what you wanted. The Menagerie was a more engaging activity than the Reckoning or Forges of the previous 2 seasons. It had a bit more objective style play that rewarded you for going faster. And the best part was, the bulk of Season of Opulence content was pretty much all playable right from the get-go. The Crown of Sorrow raid launched the same day as the season release, and was initially met with much applause. And besides the overly long first encounter, the 2 final boss fights were great. Also, it would be the first raid ever released with a contest mode modifier for day 1 raids. It was challenging in all the right ways, and prevented players from stacking bounties and just boosting power levels as fast as possible to get an edge for the world's first race. Contest mode brought all players to the same level, making the race an equal fight. The armor in Crown of Sorrow is some of the best looking armor in the game, and a few of the weapons were noteworthy, but definitely not as good as the Scourge of the Past weapons. The exotic Taraba left a lot to be desired, especially compared to Anarchy. The next few weeks would bring the rest of the seasonal content. Mid-June, another Menagerie boss would arrive, as well as a new Iron Banner questline that would reward you with a complete set of Season 7 Iron Banner armor that would be powerful drops. A week later, Menagerie would get a heroic mode which brought weekly modifiers rotating per boss, as well as booting your fire team to orbit if all team members died. Heroic Menagerie also granted you a fully masterworked item upon your first completion of the week. And if it was a bad roll or something, then you just got 7 free enhancement cores, which were a fairly scarce resource at the time, as well as the Izanagi's Burden Catalyst that increased damage by 20%, so there was quite an incentive to play the heroic mode. Season of Opulence brought some new exotics as well. Khepri's Sting for the Hunters, Astrocyte Verse for the Warlocks, and Peregrine Greaves for the Titan. 3 new Pinnacle Weapons would be added as well, just like the last 2 seasons. Wendigo for the Vanguard, Hush for Gambit, and Revoker for the Crucible. Once again, the Crucible weapon was the best of the 3. Next would be the Lumina exotic questline in July, which, if you've noticed, would be the 3rd hand cannon released in this year. Each season so far had an exotic hand cannon quest, and Lumina's would be pretty much the exact same. Tedious checklist style grinding, then a unique version of the Will of the Thousand strike that required you to have the Rose hand cannon equipped in order to shoot crystals in the strike. Lumina was a decent hand cannon, but at the time wasn't hailed as a must-have. Its perks were unique, granting healing and damage buffs to teammates was nice, but most PvE content was already so easy that it wasn't really necessary. The Tribute Hall would be added in July, which was a damage tester's dream come true. It allowed you to unlock certain enemy types and use them as test dummies in this firing range. Certainly something the game desperately needs back, and something we'd all love to see return. The Bad Juju would make a return as well and had a quest related to the Tribute Hall and a mission in the Taken Realm in order to unlock. Moments of Triumph came the same day as well, with some new cosmetics and a title to earn. And to wrap up the season at the end of July, Solstice of Heroes would return, bringing an all-new activity, the European Aerial Zone. The activity was cool, and it was nice to see a whole new arena designed for the event. The armor was incredible this year, but it was a bit grindy. It definitely crossed the line of no longer being fun to grind after the first week of the event. There was a bit more controversy during this event relating to Eververse as well. Eververse was changed in Season 7 to be much more like how it is now in the current game, selling most items outright rather than bright engrams or the prismatic matrix. And this was a double-edged sword. Now you could buy the items you want without loot box gambling garbage, but prices were expensive to get what you wanted. And most of the best items weren't available for Bright Dust, as well as the armor glows for Solstice being 5,000 Bright Dust for each glow, meaning you would need to spend 15,000 Bright Dust, or you could just buy them with silver. It was getting a bit ridiculous, and Eververse again would be heading into a bit more muddier territory once again. Now, Season of Opulence is regarded as one of the best seasons Destiny 2 has ever seen. Menagerie and its gameplay loop for loot was probably the best version of one of these match-made horde mode style activities. It brought a brand new raid, tribute haul, exotic quests, and Solstice of Heroes. It really wasn't a bad 3 months for players. Now the question is, did the seasonal style content releases work out for Bungie and Destiny players? It really depended on who you ask. If you were the type of player who liked getting new destinations, story missions, strikes, or crucible maps, basically core activity content, then the annual pass probably was a bit of a letdown. And even if you did like the annual pass content, it definitely felt bad that we didn't get at least one new strike or one crucible map for the entire year. But if you valued drip feed content and very grindy quests to pad out your playtime, then the annual pass during this year was fantastic. Most players were somewhere in the middle, wanting a bit less drip feed in our content drops, and would have liked to see maybe a bit more for the core activities besides Gambit. However, it did bring 2 raids, which made the Year of Forsaken have the most amount of raids we've ever seen in this time frame. So Raiders definitely had a great year with the annual pass. All in all, most players can agree that the Year of Forsaken was probably the best year we've ever seen in Destiny. Forsaken was an amazing expansion with so much content and system changes, and the annual pass content had a lot more staying power than the seasons we have nowadays, especially thanks to the raids. Seriously, 3 raids during this year was so awesome. But what was coming next? Destiny 3? Or would the plans change since the split from Activision? I guess we'll find out soon.